Kody Brown was more than a husband. He was a producer, a director, a man who made his own family a reality show. And the bombshell truth? The wife he professed to love most wasn't just loved, she was hired. Right from the very beginning, Robyn wasn't merely getting married. She was walking onto a set where Cody wrote the script, and everybody else was merely a supporting actor. And if you're horrified by that, wait until you hear what else occurred next. Cody Brown was not only a husband, he was a man with an agenda. A man who calculated every look, every smile, every sentence in his home, the way a movie director gauges every move on set. On the outside, Leahy, Utah's home appeared normal. Laughter, dinner tables, kids running down the hallway. But below that facade of serenity, tension was building like a storm waiting to unleash itself. When Robyn entered their lives, it was not merely another wife added to the mix. The moment she walked in the door, there was a change. Cody's focus was like a magnet, his attention calculating. He wasn't interested though. He was intent, deliberate, as if each interaction was a chapter in a story only he understood. The other wives, Mary, Janelle, and Christine, caught the subtle shift immediately. Smiles that had previously felt warm now had a bite. Chats that had been easy were now laced with circumspection. Pauses that had significance. It wasn't jealousy, not initially. It was confusion, a spreading sense that the dynamics of the family had been subtly shifted. Robyn, so young and charismatic, navigated this delicate network with an almost intuitive ease. She laughed at the precise times, nodded at the appropriate words, and smiled in ways that seemed precisely calculated to soothe or manage the room. And yet, the others soon detected cracks in the seemingly flawless performance Cody put on for the world. The manners at the family dinners, the manufactured smiles before the cameras, they were no longer sufficient to mask the truth percolating beneath. Each glance, each movement, each hushed word hinted at a greater narrative, one in which loyalty, love, and faith were being quietly tested. And as time went on, it became apparent that the coming of Robyn wasn't a new beginning. It was a turning point, a start to a tale none of them could have foreseen, and one which would cause everyone to wonder who really had the upper hand in the home. The transformation in the Brown home wasn't drastic. It was a gradual, near imperceptible disintegration. Cody's attention to Robyn became increasingly apparent, day by day, small signs magnified by the constant cameras. He smiled more with her, hung back in instances that previously had been shared among all of them, and made plans for excursions that appeared intended for 2 rather than 5. Mary, Janelle, and Christine sensed it first in the low glances passed over the kitchen counter, in the small sighs that whispered more than words. It wasn't attention though, this was influence. Cody's energy had shifted, and it ran through the household like a quiet current. The kids sensed it too, yet none of them could articulate it. The warmth they had shared from their father was now directed elsewhere, leaving voids at the dinner table, voids in the conversations, voids in the hearts that had ever trusted him. And then there were the projects, public appearances, interviews, and the never-ending pace of the cameras. What were once moments of faith and family were now carefully constructed, each tear and smile calibrated for effect. Christine protested at first, observing that their children were no longer in the spotlight. They were props, part of a larger narrative he was creating. Janelle attempted to make sense, to keep the family intact, but even her level head and reasonable thinking couldn't fill the increasing space. Every discussion, every choice seemed filtered through one prism, how it would look on camera. And yet, Cody's fixation wasn't kept under wraps. Instead, it was groomed. To outsiders, it appeared as devotion, concern, a patriarch juggling the demands of his wives. But offstage, the reality was harsh. The home was turning into a stage, and Cody was no longer a husband foremost. He was a performer, a director, and Robyn was his co-actor. And if you thought that was appalling, just wait until you learn what occurred when the first cracks showed, the first rebellion, the first breakdown in playing the role he had cast. The first true indicators of rebellion weren't boisterous whispers, little things that were initially unnoticed. Christine ceased to volunteer for the on-air segments she used to relish. Her smiles became strained, her gaze guarded. Janelle started questioning Cody's choices, asking seemingly innocuous questions, but with the undercurrent of rebellion. Even Mary, who had constantly attempted to remain impartial, began to disengage, fleeing to quiet spaces of the home where cameras could not tag along. Cody picked up on it, naturally. Each small act of autonomy was a rebuke to his meticulously built myth. He tightened control, issuing rules that seemed reasonable at first, but carried the underlying threat of exclusion, isolation, or worse, a loss of the family's public image. It was here that the drama started to feel less like a reality show and more like a high-stakes game of loyalty. The cameras, ever present, captured every raised eyebrow, every tense silence, every unspoken frustration. But the audience didn't witness the private fissures, the silent sorrow behind the manufactured grins. And then there was the unnamed first confrontation, subtle but annihilating. Cody attempted to turn the discussion away from a family gathering, but Christine would not be indulgent, her words short, her tone set. The instant stopped the room. The cameras captured a glint of tension, but not the breadth, the anger, the fear, the overwhelming disappointment that followed. For the first time, Cody saw the narrative he had been dictating disappearing from his grasp. And Robyn, always the obedient co-star, stood by, silently, her partnership with him unshaken, her very presence a reminder of who was loyal. The lines were drawn, and the home was forever altered. And if you find that stunning, wait until you hear what the other wives did, when they openly confronted the restrictions he had laid down, restrictions he claimed were holy, but were only instruments he used to ensure his dominance. The fractures widened, flowing into every aspect of the house. Cody's dominance, once apparently unbreakable, started to crack in imperceptibly small ways. Fleeting pauses, brief looks, microfacial expressions that revealed frustration he was attempting to suppress. The wives were no longer merely passive players. They had begun to occupy spaces of independence, moments where cameras couldn't follow. Mary spent long afternoons with the children, softly instructing them lessons Cody never caught, as Janelle planned errands and meetings without so much as asking him, demonstrating an independence that made him agitated. Christine, though, was the lightning rod of tension. Whenever she spoke, there was the hint of defiance, the resistance to conform to the personality he had worked so hard to create for the cameras. And still, Robyn was his ideal on-screen foil. Her composed demeanor, a jarring opposite that only served to heighten the tension between the others. The dynamics changed. The family that had hung around Cody now had covert allegiances. Quiet wars waged behind closed doors, while the cameras picked up only echoes. One night, at what was ostensibly a family council, Cody's ire reached a boiling point. He tried to steer the talk back to a planned public appearance, but Christine's reply was instant, unyielding. It was not just disagreement, this was an unspoken assertion that the rules no longer applied. The other wives observed, the tension edgy, each step, every word a message of allegiance or resistance. And as Cody stormed out, the camera stayed on their faces, fear, relief, resentment, all mixed together in a mute rebellion. For the first time, the facade of harmony was shattered by a household in still turmoil. And if you believe that this is where it stands, wait until the very root of his domination is tested by something no script could ever foresee, something which would shake the whole family and the show to its core. The subsequent weeks saw a foreboding intensity permeate the walls of every house Cody visited. Every word was calculated, every look considered, as if the household had entered a tacit agreement with the cameras. But all was not as it seemed. In the background, allegiances were being forged. Janelle was recording the tiniest details, not for the masses, but for herself. A personal revolt, a chronicle of truth the show never would tell. Mary's laughter became less frequent, punctuated by long gazes into space, the sort that betokened fatigue and the gradual loss of faith. Christine, ever watchful, observed the slight changes in Cody's behavior. His charm, so once effortless, now bore the faint metallic tinge of frustration, a carefully kept irritation that bubbled over at any second. Robyn, the perpetually calculating co-star, was the eye of the storm, a steady, stabilizing, provoking presence that pulled Kody in while leaving the others to deal with the emotional fallout. And then there was the move. A purported new beginning. An opportunity to establish a new life. A new compound. A new season. On paper, it was a dream. The absolute testament to their devotion and solidarity. In fact, it was a pressure cooker. Uprooted from friends, schools, routines, and familiarity, the family's quiet rebellions compounded. Children battled new schools, twice the chores, and tension between faith and performance intensified with each stage scene. And as the cameras turned, the public only witnessed excitement and anticipation, never the murmurs in dark corridors, the heated arguments in kitchens, the times when actual tears fell uncaught. But even in the midst of this chaos, one question hung larger than any production note or network memo. Could the family bear the exhausting stress of a show constructed not on faith, but on the well-scripted deception of it? And if you're imagining the difficulties of relocation are extreme, just wait until the real stakes of loyalty, ambition, and deceit clash in ways that will leave all of us, both on and off film, reeling. Things came to a head as the cameras saw hints of the cracks Kody had worked so hard to hide. Each family dinner was a covert war, each task a trial of compliance, each smile weighed against the page. The youngest picked up on the unstated rules, the intangible boundaries set down by a man who required loyalty in lieu of love. Christine, who had long been passively compliant, started speaking out in measured, controlled ways, her words heavy with implied truths. Janelle's keen eyes picked up nothing. She caught the subtle inconsistencies in Kody's words, the little contradictions between what he said and what he did. Mary, sandwiched in the middle, swung between hope and desperation, attempting to keep harmony alive, while secretly doubting whether the family she had created was actually real or just a stage for another person's dreams. Robyn, always the assured co-star, appeared invincible, aligning beautifully with Kody's story, enhancing his heroic profile while keeping her own secret agenda well hidden. And then the financial pressures, the hasty investments, the over-the-top promises of a fantasy compound, and the runaway debts that none of the others had consented to. With bills mounting and plans collapsing, the admirably crafted veneer of good fellowship started to crack. There were now arguments with abrasive edges, slicing through the well-bred veneer. The stress wasn't merely financial, it was power, dominance, and whose narrative would make it past the lenses. And in those still moments when the lights were extinguished and the crew had departed, the questions became real. Was Kody at the helm of a family led by religion, or had he scripted them as actors playing their roles in a show that he directed alone? Would loyalty endure when the distinction between love and performance faded so utterly? And if you believe the melodrama of moving and bills is dramatic, wait until the clandestine alliances, hushed betrayals, and backroom agendas start making themselves known in ways that no lens can even begin to fully convey. And everyone involved is hanging on the precipice of exposure, waiting to fall. As it was, the fissures had turned into fault lines. The family's sleek image created over years of assiduous editing and calculated appearances was beginning to fray in ways no one had predicted. Kody's domination, formerly subtle and unobtrusive, now emerged in the tiny quotidian details. The timing of interactions, the sitting in the shot, the answering of questions with a rehearsed calm that was barely suppressed annoyance. Christine had started to subtly rebel, her movements and expressions revealing an inner uprising that was sometimes captured on camera but seldom highlighted. Janelle's autonomy became more defined. She no longer acquiesced without hesitation to Kody's rule, her reserved self-assurance a subtle rebuke of the strictly upheld pecking order. Mary, always the peacemaker, was drawn in opposite directions, caught between loyalty and the agonizing realization that her family was not what it seemed. And Robyn, the ideal co-star, kept up her act with perfection, her comfort and synchronization with Kody's story, heightening the tension in the others. In private, complaints were increasingly voiced in hushed tones. Bills went unpaid, plans never took off, and the vision of one big happy family compound seemed to be an illusion. Every fight, once small, now had the potential for betrayal. But even as verbal skirmishes intensified, Kody continued to play the hero, smiling in front of the cameras, straightening his posture, and spouting lines intended to convince viewers he was still the patriarch. But the reality was more difficult to conceal. Body language, furtive glances, pauses in speech. Those all indicated a family torn apart, held together less by love than by duty and fear. And as animosity grew, one question hung over each encounter: who would break first, and who would no longer play his or her allotted part? And if you thought things couldn't get any worse with the cracks, wait until the secrets they've kept for years start making their way to the surface, compromising not only the family's reputation, but all they've constructed together. The house walls had ears, and the silent corners had eyes. For years, what was spoken in a whisper and glimpsed in silence had been concealed under layers of smiles and well-acted acts. But now, the tension was too thick to be avoided. Money problems, emotional betrayals, and old resentments were emerging, each one splashing like a hammer against the carefully crafted facade. The cameras caught the surface, but beneath, a much darker tale was taking shape. Cody, always the showman, doubled down on his act. All meetings, every conversation about the future of the family were tainted by control, the dominance of his image over true human connection. Janelle, feeling manipulated, started subtly to cut down his control, her quiet self-assurance becoming small acts of defiance. Christine's frustration, previously kept in check, broke out in brief moments, narrowing eyes, clenched fists, soft voice but slicing. Mary, who was sandwiched in the middle, was finding it difficult to balance loyalty with the emerging realization that her world was being skillfully choreographed for another person's story. And Robyn, moving so easily through each scene, aligning with Cody, was not just acting along, she was in on it, a co-star in a drama none of the other wives had joined. Her calm brought out the tension growing between them, and the rest of the family looked stiff, nervous, and more out of place. But it wasn't about control or performance either. Behind the histrionics were secrets that, when they finally came out, would destroy the delicate threads that kept them together. Money mismanagement masquerading as family planning, personal agendas masquerading as spiritual disagreements, and deliberate choices masquerading as happenstance. All of these hinted at a bigger deception. And with the widening of the cracks, one sinister question began to cross each heart. If the family had been a stage for so long, who among them would leave first? And what would be left when the curtain finally closed? And if you find that surprising, wait until you see what followed. When the first domino finally toppled, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first actual break didn't arrive with yelling or arguing. It arrived stealthily, in the guise of absence. A missed meeting, a missed dinner, a glance that hung too long in silence. The fissures that had been widening over the years were now impossible to overlook. The other wives saw it first, Cody's gaze darting, not for love, but calculation. His smiles being a hair off, practiced, a bit too well behaved for someone who was meant to be at the center of a family. Christine, drained from the ever-present balancing act, started pulling away. Her movements, which had once been open and inviting, grew pointed and calculated. She questioned fiscal choices that were not replied to or deflected. And amidst the silence, everything shifted. The camera filmed her despondency, but could not film the quiet rage building beneath that placid facade. Janelle, noting the change in the dynamics, started to push back quietly, questioning Cody's dominion in moves that were minuscule but resounded across the horizon. Mary, caught between loyalty and raising suspicion, hesitated, questioning whether she was an accomplice or a bystander. Robyn, on the other hand, stayed a fixture in Cody's life. She was magnetic, but her presence also intensified the discomfort. The other wives could sense it. The instinctual alignment, the ease he showed, and the unspoken message rang loud and clear. The playing field was no longer level. Every glance, every movement, every hushed exchange was a limelight on the disparity, a testament that the narrative they were living was no longer theirs to narrate. And then the first glimmer of insurrection came. A choice, a seemingly trivial one, would begin to have a ripple effect throughout the household, revealing loyalties, pushing boundaries, and showing just how shakily the family's foundation really was. The question hung like a storm cloud. Who would bend and who would break? And if you think that's appalling, wait until you see what went down when the initial alliance broke, and the family's carefully choreographed world started to fall apart in ways no one could have anticipated. The tension that had been building for years at last blew its top in a way no one could avoid. It wasn't a screamed fight at first, but a soft, acidic confrontation that left the room shaking with things left unsaid. Christine, driven to breaking point, finally spoke out what had been seething within her for seasons: her frustration, her fear, and her sense of betrayal. Her words pierced the scripted smiles and pretentious harmony, leaving Cody momentarily vulnerable, open. Janelle, feeling the turn, didn't hold back either. Her voice, strong and unflinching, confronted the carefully built narrative that had been dictating their lives. She challenged not merely decisions, but motives, the insidious manipulations long overlooked. Mary's eyes overflowed with tears as she comprehended the reality she had long suspected. The patriarch they had formerly admired was not what he appeared to be. The power balance, previously presumed, was dissolving. Robyn, remaining unruffled and collected, observed from the side. Her relationship with Cody was not a secret, but even she could not entirely cover up the cracks beginning to appear on the surface. The veneer was breaking, and the cameras, perpetually vigilant, recorded every look, every pause, every second of weakness. And then the first big crack occurred. A choice that would forever alter the family dynamic. Loyalties were challenged, alliances forged and dissolved in secret, and the thin strands that kept the household together started breaking. What had appeared as subtle tensions now emerged as fundamental, institutional cracks. The question looming in the air was stark: who would quit, and who would remain stuck in the job assigned to them? And if you thought the previous conflicts were bad, wait until you see the domino effect this standoff would trigger: the secret pacts, the silent betrayals, and the surprising choices that would lead the family to its final confrontation. The fallout from the confrontation resonated through the family like a shockwave. Every choice, every word spoken after that, had weight, tension thick enough to cut the room. The meticulously constructed facade of unity, once aired before millions, was now a frail illusion precariously close to crumbling. Money, previously a background issue, became a focal battlefield. Bills, investments, and promises, all largely dismissed or minimized, finally clamored for attention, exposing fissures covered up by the glare. Cody, once so confident and commanding, now lurched with a discreet defensiveness. Each word weighed, each movement calculated. The cameras caught each of his expressions, the tension between the patriarch he acted and the man fighting to keep things under his control. His former control over his wives, over the story itself, was draining away from him, and he knew it. At the same time, the wives discovered their voices in ways they never had. Christine, Janelle, and Mary started making independent decisions, not only defying Cody's rule, but defying the whole system that governed them. Money matters, social outings, even the trivialities of everyday life were acts of quiet rebellion. Every little win fueled further momentum, every quiet act of disobedience rattling the household's foundations. Robyn, who remained in close proximity to Cody, found herself torn between loyalty and pragmatism. Her position of co-star and confidant had now collided with the plain fact she was no longer merely a part of a television program. She was a part of a family disintegrating before her very eyes. And yet, amidst all this turmoil, one had to wonder, would the family be able to survive this disintegration, or was it irreversible? And if you thought the financial burden was the final challenge, hold on until you witness how personal deceptions, secret motives, and years of anger intersect to make choices no one anticipated. The public now had an appetite for each tidbit, each misstep, each rumor of scandal. Social media was ablaze with rumors, fans analyzing each picture, each tweet, each tiny change in behavior. The Brown family was more than a reality show anymore. They were a spectacle, a living drama whose seams were being pulled apart more quickly than anyone could manage. The fame that once sheltered them now laid bare every crack, every fault line, every betrayal. Behind the gates of their home, tension boiled over. Speeches became negotiations. Words, once relaxed and affectionate, were now freighted with implication. every utterance a test of devotion or coded accusation. Cody, more and more alone in his fixation on control, started doubling down on his regulations, his demands, his immutable hold on what he felt the narrative should be. But the wives, strong in years of endurance, and the increasing transparency of his manipulations, pushed against him in quiet, relentless ways. Each border tested, each evasive denial, eroded the image he had so painstakingly built. And the children, quiet witnesses to each confrontation, each disappointment, each betrayal, their allegiance fragmented out of control, their voices now shouting out questions that needed to be answered, about justice, about truth, about the gap between words and deeds. While Robyn was the constant counterpoint, the one not affected by the mayhem, her existence heightened the tension, her siding with Cody forging a wordless war in the family atmosphere. And if you thought the fights up until now were dramatic, just wait until the point when the secrets start spilling out, showing alliances, secrets, and deeply repressed grudges that will make everyone, Cody, the wives, and even the kids, face what they really desire and who they actually are. The question now cannot be avoided. When the curtain finally goes down, will the family come out more resilient, fractured but intact, or will the snare of ambition and manipulation be too poisonous to endure? The cracks were no longer delicate, they were chasms. All those artfully built illusions, all those practiced smiles, all those carefully choreographed scenes were starting to fall apart under their own weight. Cody's efforts to keep control in hand were growing desperate, verging on frantic, as the audience, the wives, and even the children started catching glimpses of the man behind the mask. The father, the spiritual leader, the devoted husband, each role now seemed empty, a costume he could no longer pull off with credibility. Rumors that had previously circulated discreetly now burst into the public spotlight. The press was quick to seize on discrepancies, on contradictory accounts, on any and every Facebook update that hinted at ulterior motives. And within the family, the discreet rebellions made more noise. Christine's independence no longer subtle. It was a statement. Janelle's voice, once reserved, was clamoring for notice. Mary's complaints could no longer be dispensed with. The three women had grown from the supporting cast to the indisputable heroes of their own tale, and the change shook Cody in ways the cameras could never adequately record. Even Robyn, Cody's co-star and beloved sidekick, was not spared. Her relationship with Cody fueled tension and jealousy that seethed below every encounter, and the fissures in their partnership began to widen. Off-camera, the strain of upholding the image of the perfect polygamous family clashed with the gritty reality of ambition, bitterness, and burnout. And if you think the backlash was inevitable, the bombshell turned out to be when private dialogues previously concealed from cameras began leaking, exposing alliances, betrayals, and secrets that even the most dedicated viewers had never suspected. The story that Cody had worked so hard to manage for so long was unfolding in front of his eyes, and all attempts to keep it under wraps only brought more to light. The question now hangs, as the walls of deception crumble, who will stand, and who will be engulfed by the very tale they had strived so desperately to command? The unraveling was no longer an insidious storm. It had become a raging hurricane. All the blunders Cody had made, every deliberate step taken to weave his perfect tale, now risked eating away at him. Fans who used to applaud now questioned, analyzed, and argued every second on television. And off-camera, the women who had for so long played supporting characters were taking their own control, reclaiming stories that had been pilfered from them. Financial stress, emotional betrayals, and years of old grievances intersected, forming a toxic cocktail. The deserted corridors of Coyote Pass, once dreamt of as a refuge and platform, resonated with shouting, hissed resentments, and thick silences of disillusionment. Cody's fixation on managing perception had isolated him. The family, once a meticulously constructed ensemble cast, had disintegrated into individuals with separate narratives, agendas, and aspirations that no one, including him, could write. And if you thought the tension was only private, the online world heightened it. Fans tore apart posts on social media, deleted clips and old interviews, constructing a narrative much darker and more nuanced than the scripted episodes ever depicted. Cody's public image, the guy who once inspired admiration and sympathy, was now subject to withering examination. Every move, every utterance, every look was picked apart for ulterior motives, contradictions, and hypocrisy. But even in this turmoil, there was one thing certain: these women were no longer looking to him for approval. Christine, Janelle, and Mary were now the masters of their own fate, taking back power that had been withheld for so long. Robyn also had her comeuppance, torn between allegiance to Cody and the reality that truth had ultimately revealed. And as the final chapters approached, one haunting question lingered in the air. After more than a decade of illusion, performance, and manipulation, could the family ever rebuild, or had the very foundation of their lives been irrevocably shattered? The cameras may have stopped rolling, but the story was far from over. The drama, the betrayals, the quiet heartache, they all clung to the walls, the social media timelines, and the memories of those who had lived through it. Cody, the former star, the self-dubbed hero of his own tale, was left standing alone in the shadow of a legacy he had fought so hard to orchestrate. The women, former supporting actors in his play, were now writers of their own stories. Every choice they made, every route they took, was a testament to a courage forged through years of manipulation, abandonment, and silent pain. And in that silence, everything altered. The pretense of the ideal polygamous family, the narrative lovingly crafted for consumption by the masses, had been at last laid bare. And what was left was raw, unvarnished, human, suffering, strength, outrage, love, all intertwined in a reality that no script could possibly do justice to. It was messy, unpredictable, and hauntingly authentic. Robyn's meticulously crafted world, the one that had once existed as a sanctuary, was now subject to the same scrutiny and consequence as everything else. Cody's reign, his performance-based empire founded on ratings and ambition, had collapsed. The crowd that once applauded now sat in awe, asking, questioning, who were the heroes and who were the villains? And perhaps most of all, who held the reins in a family founded on deception? As the last credits of this chapter approached, one thing was certain: no reality show, no production, no perfectly scripted moment could ever hold the depth of human emotion. The Brown family's story, their victories, their betrayals, and their unspoken truths, would still reverberate long after the cameras were gone. So here is the question we leave you with. After all the secrets, all the lies, all the backdoor betrayals, what do you really believe? Was Cody a patriarch, a performer, or something much more nuanced? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Unspoken Wives for the stories no one else is telling.